Lewis Hamilton has seen something inside Ferrari's Monza test, and now rival teams are asking if it should be banned. Not after a race, before it even debuts, because Ferrari is testing a system that could hide a 30-horsepower engine deficit without actually fixing the engine. A rotating rear wing that changes shape at full speed. A redesigned floor that unlocks hidden stability. And a performance game that could completely shift how energy is recovered and deployed. If this is legal, Ferrari becomes a title threat overnight. If it is not, this could trigger one of the biggest technical battles in recent Formula One history. And everything comes down to what happened in a single, secret test at Monza. Ferrari didn't arrive at this moment by chance. This started with a weakness they could not hide. From the very first race, the gap was already there. Australia exposed everything. Mercedes finished first and second. Ferrari followed, but over 15 seconds behind in the same race. And that gap came from one place. Not strategy, not mistakes, pure engine performance. Because while Ferrari built a car that could handle corners, that could carry speed through technical sections, every time they hit straight, they lost time. Consistently, lap after lap. And that creates a very specific kind of pressure. Because when your car is almost good enough, you don't rebuild. You take risks, calculated risks. And that is exactly what Ferrari did. But here's where things get interesting. China looked like progress. A podium for Hamilton. A moment that suggested Ferrari was moving forward. But underneath that result, nothing fundamental had changed. They were still managing the deficit, not eliminating it. And then came Japan. And Japan removed any doubt. Leclerc on the podium. Hamilton far behind. Same car, same conditions, completely different outcome. More than 10 seconds between them by the end of the race. That is not strategy. That is performance. And after that race, Hamilton said something that changed the tone completely. Ferrari is not at the front. Right now, they are the third team. That is not frustration. That is clarity. Because when a driver like Hamilton says that publicly, it means the internal concern is already serious. And Ferrari understood something very quickly. If nothing changed, the season would be decided early. So they didn't wait. They accelerated everything. An aggressive development program. Multiple tracks. Continuous work. Fiorano. Mugello. And finally, Monza. But Monza is not just another step. This is the moment where everything is tested together. 200 kilometers. That is all they get. No race weekend. No full simulation of conditions. Just a limited window to prove that their solution works in reality. And this is exactly why the situation feels different now. Because rival teams are not reacting to what Ferrari is. They are reacting to what Ferrari might become. Because if Ferrari solves that one problem, the power deficit, then everything else they already have becomes dangerous. Very dangerous. And this is where Hamilton's perspective matters. Because from inside the team, from inside the car, you don't just see performance. You feel change. You feel when the car behaves differently. When energy is deployed differently, when something is working that wasn't working before. And that is exactly what makes this moment so critical. Because whatever Hamilton has noticed, whatever Ferrari is testing, it is enough to trigger concern across the grid. Not after Monza. Now, before the full picture is even visible. And that only happens when something bigger is coming. Something that does not just improve lap time, but changes how that lap time is created. And that is exactly what Ferrari is trying to prove in one single test. What Hamilton is feeling inside the car is not coming from one part. It's coming from how everything is starting to connect. Because Ferrari didn't just build upgrades. They built a system. And the moment that system starts working together, the behavior of the car changes completely. This is where the floor becomes critical. Not as an upgrade, as the foundation. Because without stability, nothing else matters. The new floor Ferrari is testing in Monza is not a small evolution. It is a redesign, built to increase downforce, improve airflow under the car, and most importantly, stabilize the car in high-speed sections. And that last part is everything. Because high-speed instability has been one of Ferrari's biggest problems. Not always visible, but always present. Moments where the car feels nervous. Moments where the driver cannot fully commit. And in Formula One, hesitation costs time. Every corner, every lap. So this floor is not just about adding grip. It is about giving confidence. Because when a driver trusts the car, they brake later. They carry more speed. They commit earlier on the throttle. and that alone can change lap time dramatically. But here is where things start to connect, because once the car becomes stable underneath, you can afford to be more aggressive on top. And that is exactly what Ferrari is doing. They built the foundation first. Now they are activating the advantage. And this is where Hamilton starts to notice something unusual. Because the way the car behaves on corner exit, the way it accelerates down the straight, the way energy seems to come back into the system, it feels different. Not just faster, more efficient. And that points directly to one thing: energy management. Because Ferrari is not just trying to go faster. They are trying to use what they already have better. Recover more, deploy more, lose less. And that is where the entire concept starts to reveal itself. The floor stabilizes the airflow. That stability allows more aggressive aerodynamic behavior. That behavior reduces drag on the straights. And reduced drag means more energy recovery. Everything is connected. Everything feeds into the same goal: compensate for the engine deficit without touching the engine. And that is where things start to feel uncomfortable for rival teams. Because if this works, Ferrari has found performance in a place that is very difficult to regulate. Not a single component, not a single change, but a combination, a behavior. And behaviors are much harder to control, much harder to define as illegal. But here is the risk. Because if the floor does not deliver exactly what Ferrari expects, everything above it becomes unstable. The aggressive concepts stop working. The balance disappears. And the car becomes unpredictable again. Which means all of this depends on one thing: consistency. Not peak performance, not one fast lap. Consistency across every corner, every braking zone, every acceleration phase. And that is exactly what Monza is testing. Not just speed, but reliability of the concept. Because if Ferrari proves that this system works lap after lap, then what Hamilton is feeling is real. Not temporary, not experimental, real. And once it becomes real, the rest of the grid has a problem. Because they are not just chasing a faster car. They are chasing a different way of creating performance. And that takes time. Time Ferrari may not give them. So now the focus shifts from what Ferrari is testing to what happens next if it works. Because once the foundation is confirmed, there is nothing left holding back the most controversial part of this entire concept. The one piece that could turn all of this into a real advantage, and also into a real problem for everyone else. And that controversial piece is exactly where everything could cross the line. Because once the car is stable, once the airflow is controlled, once the platform is consistent, Ferrari activates the system everyone is questioning: the rear wing, Macarena. And this is where Hamilton's concern starts to make sense. Because this is not a passive component. It moves, it adapts, it changes the behavior of the car in real time. On the straights, it rotates fully, reducing drag in a way that traditional systems simply cannot match. And that creates two immediate effects: more top speed and more energy recovery, which feeds directly back into performance. But here is where things become uncomfortable. Because the advantage is not coming from one clear source. It is coming from interaction. The wing reduces drag. The reduced drag increases energy efficiency. The improved efficiency compensates for engine weakness. And suddenly, Ferrari is not losing as much on the straights. Maybe not losing at all. And that is where rival teams start asking questions. Not because the wing exists, but because of how it behaves. Because there is a fine line in Formula One between innovation and interpretation of the rules. And when a system actively changes its aerodynamic state multiple times per lap, that line becomes very thin. But here is the real issue. The system has to return to its original position before braking. Every time. Perfectly. Because if it doesn't, the car enters the corner without the downforce it needs. Rear grip disappears. The balance shifts instantly. And the driver is left reacting instead of controlling. This is not a theory. This already happened earlier in the season. Moments where the synchronization failed. Moments where the car became unstable under braking. And that is why this system is being questioned. Not just for performance, but for safety. Because if a system cannot guarantee consistent behavior, it opens the door to regulatory intervention. It opens the door to scrutiny, and in some cases restriction. So now imagine the situation. Ferrari is close to making this work. Very close. Close enough for Hamilton to feel the difference. Close enough for rivals to react before seeing it fully. And that creates pressure, because teams do not wait for confirmation. They act on suspicion. They raise concerns. They push for clarification. They try to slow things down, because even a small delay can change everything. But here is where the story goes deeper, because the system itself may not be illegal. Not directly. The concept might sit within the rules, but the way it behaves, the way it interacts with other systems, that is where the gray area lives. And in Formula One, gray areas are where championships are won or lost. Because if Ferrari has found a way to combine stability, drag reduction, and energy recovery into one synchronized system, then they are not just improving performance. They are redefining efficiency. And efficiency is much harder to regulate than raw power. Much harder to measure. Much harder to limit. And that is exactly why this is becoming a problem for the rest of the grid. Because you cannot easily copy something you do not fully understand. And you cannot easily stop something that technically follows the rules. So now everything returns to Monza. Because this is where the final answers begin to appear. Not publicly, not immediately, but in the data, in the feedback, in what Hamilton feels behind the wheel. Because if the system works, if the synchronization issue is solved, if the car remains stable under braking, then the advantage becomes real. And once it becomes real, the conversation shifts from "is it possible" to "how do we stop it?" And that is when things escalate, because that is when formal questions begin. That is when technical directives appear. That is when the fight moves away from the track and into the rule book. So now the real question is not whether Ferrari built something clever, is whether they built something that lives just close enough to the limit, that no one can shut it down in time. Because if they did, then what Hamilton has found is not just an advantage, is the beginning of a technical battle the rest of the season will revolve around. And once that battle starts, there is no clean way out. Only one outcome. Someone finds the edge of the rules, and everyone else is forced to chase it.